locations linked to President Biden. The question today for the Attorney General, will he appoint a special counsel? Now, sources tell CBS News that the Department of Justice review has included interviews with multiple witnesses who may have knowledge of how the classified documents were handled and how they ended up in these locations. Let's listen now to the Attorney General, Mr. Garland.
Good afternoon. I'm here today to announce the appointment of Robert Hur as a special counsel pursuant to Department of Justice regulations governing such matters. In keeping with those regulations, I have today notified the designated members of each House of Congress of the appointment. I'm joined today by John Lausch, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, who conducted the initial investigation into the matter that I will describe today. On the evening of November 4th, 2022, the National Archives Office of Inspector General contacted a prosecutor at the Department of Justice. It informed him that the White House had notified the archives that documents bearing classification markings were identified at the office of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement, located in Washington, D.C. That office was not authorized for storage of classified documents. The prosecutor was also advised that those documents had been secured in an archives facility. On November 9th, the FBI commenced an assessment consistent with standard protocols to understand whether classified information had been mishandled in violation of federal law. On November 14th, pursuant to Section 600.2b of the Special Counsel Regulations, I assigned U.S. Attorney Lausch to conduct an initial investigation to inform my decision whether to appoint a special counsel. Mr. Lausch has served as the U.S. Attorney in Chicago since 2017. Before that, he spent more than a decade as an assistant U.S. Attorney in that same office. I selected him to conduct the initial investigation because I was confident his experience would ensure that it would be done professionally and expeditiously. On December 20th, President Biden's personal counsel informed Mr. Lausch that additional documents bearing classification markings were identified in the garage of the president's private residence in Wilmington, Delaware. President Biden's counsel informed Mr. Lausch that those documents were among other records from the period of the president's service as vice president. The FBI went to the location and secured those documents. On January 5th, 2023, Mr. Lausch briefed me on the results of his initial investigation and advised me that further investigation by a special counsel was warranted. Based on Mr. Lausch's initial investigation, I concluded that, under the special counsel regulations, it was in the public interest to appoint a special counsel. In the days since, while Mr. Lausch continued the investigation, the department identified Mr. Hur for appointment as special counsel. This morning, President Biden's personal counsel called Mr. Lausch and stated that an additional document bearing classification markings was identified at the president's personal residence in Wilmington, Delaware. When I first contacted Mr. Lausch about this matter, he said he could lead the initial investigation, but would be unable to accept any longer-term assignment because he would be leaving the department in early 2023 for the private sector. U.S. Attorney Lausch and his team of prosecutors and agents have conducted this initial investigation with professionalism and speed. I am grateful to them. Earlier today, I signed an order appointing Robert Hur as special counsel for the matter I've just described. The document authorizes him to investigate whether any person or entity violated the law in connection with this matter. The special counsel will not be subject to the day-to-day supervision of any official of the department, but he must comply with the regulations, procedures, and policies of the department. Mr. Hur has a long and distinguished career as a prosecutor. In 2003, he joined the department's criminal division, where he worked on counterterrorism, corporate fraud, and appellate matters. From 2007 until 2014, Mr. Hur served as an assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Maryland, where he prosecuted matters ranging from violent crime to financial fraud. In 2017, Mr. Hur rejoined the department as the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. In 2018, he was nominated and confirmed to serve as a U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. As U.S. Attorney, He supervised some of the department's more important national security, public corruption, and other high-profile matters. I will ensure that Mr. Hur receives all the resources he needs to conduct his work. As I have said before, I strongly believe that the normal processes of this department can handle all investigations with integrity. But under the regulations, the extraordinary circumstances here require the appointment of a special counsel for this matter. This appointment underscores for the public the department's commitment to both independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters, and to making decisions indisputably guided only by the facts and the law. I am confident that Mr. Hur will carry out his responsibility in an even-handed and urgent manner and in accordance with the highest traditions of this department. Thank you all.
Have you ever spoken to the president about this investigation, sir?
And there you have it, the Attorney General of the United States making some big news this morning, saying that he will appoint a special counsel to investigate those documents with classified markings that have been found in multiple locations. These are documents from the Obama-Biden administration when Biden was vice president of the United States. And we have some new timelines in terms of when those documents were found and how this whole thing unfolded. Let's bring in Adriana Diaz. She's here with me. She was the first to report about the discovery of those documents. What stood out to you?
What really stood out to me, Nora, is the fact that on December 20th, documents were found in President Biden's garage of his Wilmington home. We were told this morning by the White House about those documents. However, earlier this year on Monday, when we broke this story, that's the first time we heard from the White House about this issue. And they only talked to us about, in a statement that they released, about the documents found, the initial documents found on November 2nd at the Penn Biden Center. By that point, documents had been found at President Biden's home in Delaware in Wilmington. What was also interesting is that an additional document was found just this morning in that same home in a room next to the garage, which President Biden said today on camera was really one of his rooms where, he called it his personal library. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting is the timeline and the fact that the White House did not tell us about the original the documents found in the garage when they issued a statement about this on Monday.
What does it mean now with the appointment of this special counsel to begin this investigation? What happens now?
Now a special counsel will be able to investigate this. And really why it's important is because they can operate independently within the Justice Department. So it is to ensure complete independence because remember, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, was appointed by President Biden. So he wants to make sure that someone who was not appointed by President Biden is overseeing this investigation. So the investigation will move forward. It will have greater resources, presumably. And we're learning a lot about Robert Hur. He was formerly, as you heard the Attorney General say, the U.S. Attorney for Maryland. And why this is interesting is because the National Security Agency is located in Maryland. So he should have plenty of experience investigating cases related to sensitive information.
All right, Adriana Diaz, who first broke this story, stand by. Want to bring in Scott McFarland. He is on Capitol Hill. Scott, already we heard from the Speaker of the House for the first time about what he called a double standard.
Yeah, and the congressional reaction is coming in fast and furious, as one would expect. I just spoke with the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, Michael Turner of Ohio, who says he's asking the Department of National Intelligence, the Director of National Intelligence, to do an assessment, a damage assessment of what might have been exposed by the records in Delaware and the records here on Capitol Hill at the Penn Biden Center. The top Republican on the House Armed Services Committee wants the Department of Defense to do the same, an assessment of what might have been exposed, what damage might have been incurred. Democrats, including the Democratic leader in the U.S. House, Hakeem Jeffries, say there's a big difference here, though, still. That the Biden team seems to have voluntarily notified the archives and handed over the records, whereas in the Trump case, in the Mar-a-Lago case, requests for the records were allegedly ignored or disregarded. But then there's Kevin McCarthy accusing Democrats of a double standard here. And Nora, that leaves the Capitol where it's often most comfortable, with each side accusing the other of hypocrisy and each side accusing the other of a double standard.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, I must ask you, I understand that you know Attorney Robert Hur, who has been appointed as special counsel.
Yeah, I spent several years covering then U.S. Attorney Robert Hur in Maryland. He has a deep track record of financial records cases, public corruption cases, and because Maryland is home of the National Archives headquarters, he has this obscure work record of handling archives theft cases. Our CBS News review of federal prosecutions in Maryland shows a series of cases prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney in Maryland of people who stole things from the National Archives. An otherwise obscure type of case, Robert Hur has some backstory with this, some experience with this.
That is noteworthy. Scott McFarlane on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you. Let's bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. And Ed, you notably yesterday were pressing the White House press secretary for more information. We're stonewalled at every single turn. The White House has been reluctant to provide really any information on this matter. When you listen to the Attorney General this morning, what stands out to you? What additional questions do you have?
Where to begin, Nora, but the most notable now is that this discovery of a second batch of classified documents actually occurred on December 20th, before Christmas, at his home in Wilmington, Delaware. Notably today, he was quite glib when asked to explain why he was storing these documents apparently in his garage. A reporter pointed out it's the same garage where he stores his Corvette. He grew somewhat defensive, saying, yes, and both the Corvette and those documents were behind a locked garage. Either way, that would appear to be in violation of federal law that says classified documents aren't supposed to be sitting in someone's garage the way they are. The White House counsel's office has issued two statements since CBS News first broke this story. They were vague to some extent now about the timeline, at least based on what the Attorney General just told us. While they may have been cooperating with the Justice Department, and while they are claiming that they're being somewhat transparent now by telling us what they know, and the President saying he was surprised, he withheld information about that second batch. He also withheld details of the timeline, and that's going to raise a lot of questions, at least in the public and political space, about why a president who vowed to be so transparent from day one has decided to withhold this. Remember, there was nothing stopping the President of the United States from disclosing this when he first learned about it in November. Nothing that would have stopped him from saying before the Justice Department began, we found these, we weren't supposed to have them, we've turned them over, and get ahead of it. Instead, for whatever reason, among the questions we haven't been able to answer, why, he has decided to withhold this information. And we'll see later today, when the press secretary is scheduled to take questions again, whether or not more information is forthcoming, or whether this announcement from the special counsel now means that they have to withhold even more information. But also important to point out, for somebody who campaigned on trying to bring professionalism and better management of federal government to Washington, he now joins his predecessors as the subject of an investigation by a special counsel.
That's right. It is worth noting that President Biden himself is not under investigation, but what happened to these documents is some of the outstanding questions. Why did it take 2 months for this to become public, as Ed has pointed out? And actually, I think kind of one of the most important things are what's the content of these documents that were marked classified. We do know that some of them were highly classified. Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Thank you one more time. Want to bring in Adriana Diaz. And about that question, I know you've questioned Republicans about this as well. Is there a comparison, or is it a contrast with what happened with Donald Trump and his documents?
I think there are important distinctions here, Nora. The first is in size. We know that Donald Trump had more than 300 documents in Mar-a-Lago that the government, the Justice Department, and the National Archives were trying to seek for more than a year. In this case, we're told it's a small number in Delaware and roughly 10 that were found at the Penn Biden Center.
Ed, I stand by Adriana. Ed, do you have something more? I see you motioning.
Thank you, Nora. I have been inquiring here. This is a question that we often ask of whether the White House got advance notice of the Attorney General's announcement. A senior White House official, somebody who would know, is telling me no, they did not. That is standard practice, but important to point out in this case that they were not given a heads up by the Attorney General that he was appointing a special prosecutor.
There is usually some church and state there, if you will. They do try and remain independent, if you will. So, Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much. Adriana Diaz and Scott McFarlane on the Hill, thank you so much. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news. And we'll have a full wrap-up tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington.
You've been watching a CBS News special report, and you heard it there. Attorney General Merrick Garland appointing a special counsel to investigate documents found at President Biden's home and former office.
We're going to bring in now CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett and CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Major, Nancy, welcome to you both. Thanks for being here as we are trying to suss out this major news. On that front, I'm going to start with you, Major. The big announcement